Anthony, close the door. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. This is the History Club. It's not Hadassah. We're lucky today. Our speaker is Art Landis. Art graduated from the City College of New York, like most of us. Right? Hey. With a BBA degree. He's a certified public accountant, so if you still need your taxes done, see Art.
I'm retired, none of that.
Come on, Art. He served in the Army and the artillery. He was a sergeant. He worked for 30 years at the Bank of America as a vice president and portfolio manager in the lending division. Art, you're on.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. The first thing I want to do is pay tribute to Lenny Levine, who ran this club. Passed away last September, I believe, September, October. And just to tell a little story that Lenny had told to this audience, and that is that we have some things in common. We both grew up in the Bronx, and we both grew up on the same street, Shakespeare Avenue. I lived at 1220 Shakespeare Avenue, and Lenny lived at about something like 1410 Shakespeare Avenue. And Lenny went to DeWitt Clinton High School, old boys school, noted for its sports. And Lenny was a track and field man. And he was evidently pretty good because up the block from me and down the block from him was Sacred Heart Roman Catholic Church. And his friends recruited him to be a ringer on that team. And Sacred Heart Roman Catholic Church, again, was up the block from me, and was a very large church. It went from 168th Street halfway down to 169th Street, and from Shakespeare Avenue all the way down to Nelson Avenue. It was a pretty good distance. And I've been in St. Pat's in New York, and I've been at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and those are large, I think the two largest Roman Catholic churches. In this church I had been in once. We lived in a building, there were 60 apartments, and we lived in 3H, and the young lady that lived in 1J was a member of that church, Madeline Martin. And something interesting about Madeline Martin, about 2 weeks ago I turned 78. I was born March 8th, 1940, and Madeline Martin was born 9 days before me, but yet she's only had 19 birthdays. Because she was born February 29th, 1940. In any case, one of the things that I've done in my life is the kids in the neighborhood, play dates, schmay dates. We, at 8 years old, Babe Ruth died, and we as a group went down to Yankee Stadium and stood on line and saw Babe Ruth at his wake, laid out there. So one of the other things was, for whatever reason, I just don't remember the reason, Madeline Martin took us up to Sacred Heart Church, and I was able to see inside, and again, it was a very, very big church. In any case, Lenny ran for DeWitt Clinton on Saturdays, and on Sundays he ran for Sacred Heart. So he's ready to run for Sacred Heart, and like Love and Marriage, Horse and Carriage, Lenny Levine and Sacred Heart Roman Catholic Church just didn't go. So he changed his name to Patty Quinn. That's right, he told us Patty Quinn. So Saturday, Lenny Levine, Sunday, Patty Quinn. The starter is looking at the participants, and he sees Patty Quinn in the position. He says, "You ran yesterday as Lenny Levine for DeWitt Clinton, right?" So the starter caught him, and he said, "Look," pulled him over to the side, "I'll let you run, but you can't come in first, second, or third." So that's Lenny's story. Last year, I talked about Dr. Paul Brief. That's the book on the left, your right over there. And he's a friend of mine from New City, a member of my synagogue in New City, and he wrote a book, Vietnam Surgeons' Recall of Vietnam. And in that book, the sum and substance was that Well, he was born in Romania, came to the United States, became a naturalized citizen, and in 1963, like me, he got drafted. They got a draft notice, and he was already 2 years into medical school, so he had to make a decision of what to do. And friends of his were saying, you know what, go to Canada, you can avoid the whole thing. And he wanted nothing of that, as I wouldn't want anything like that. And he looked at his choices. He could have gone in for 6 months and then 5.5-year obligation after that in the reserve, or he could go in for 2 years. Or for surgeons, or for people in medical school, you can go under something that was called the Berry Plan. And for that, you are able to finish medical school, you're able to do an internship, and you're able to do a residency. And then after that, then you give 14 months of service to your unit. And that's what he chose to do. So in 1967 or whatever, he joined the, well, at that time, he joined the Naval Reserve. They had this plan. And he was on the impression that when he finished, that he would go on some ship somewhere and maybe treat, as an orthopedic surgeon, maybe treat a sprained ankle, or in some circumstance, maybe even have to perform an appendectomy, which he was capable of doing. But he didn't know, he says, that the Navy supports the Marines. So instead of that, he went to Camp Pendleton and did regular Marine basic training, and then he did Marine medical training, and he found himself in Vietnam. And the sum and substance was he treated 168 armed forces personnel who had their legs blown off or injured severely from bouncing betties, which are those grenades that the Vietnamese would plant. And he tried to do something about it. He wrote a letter to the general, the commanding general, and he felt that the mail was censored, that the commanding general never got his letter. And what he was trying to tell him is that these people are going out on patrols and they're getting severely injured. Isn't there an alternative to that? And like I said, it just went, it never got to him, nothing ever happened. Getting back to the United States, he's now practicing orthopedic surgery, and he's sitting in the emergency room, and they're bringing people in with mangled bodies from head-on collisions on the Palisades Interstate Parkway. So he did the same thing. He wrote a letter to the Parks Commissioner and in New York State, and they did build the barrier in the middle, and that ceased. So something good happened from his service in Vietnam that he was able to get this done. In any case, Paul Brief had met Barry Fixler, who I'm going to talk about today, at various veterans meetings in Rockland County. And he encouraged him to write this book. So, the name of the book is SemperCool. And Barry Fixler, let me just tell you a little about the author. He's a U.S. Marine Corps veteran who served in Vietnam in 1967 and 68, and he fought on Hill 861-A during the legendary Siege of Khe Sanh. After receiving an honorable discharge in 1973, he used the GI Bill to finance his undergraduate degree from the Gemological Institute of America and joined his father's jewelry business. He lives with his wife, Linda, in Bardoni, New York, where he owns Barry's Estate Jewelry. Barry was named 2009 Veteran of the Year by the Rockland County Coordinating Council. Semper Fidelis. That's the motto of the United States Marine Corps, adopted in 1883. Latin for always faithful, faithful to God, country, family, and the Marine Corps. It is also the title of the official march of the United States Marine Corps, written by John Philip Sousa. And SemperCool is the story of someone who thought it was cool to believe in Semper Fidelis. This memoir is about a skinny kid from Syosset, New York, who rather than heading to college after high school enlists in the Marines and goes off to fight in Vietnam. He tells the story of Vietnam as a fighting man with little fanfare, just blood and guts. He was fortunate to come back in one piece without physical or emotional scars, and as we see later, his fighting experience came in handy when an attempted robbery of his jewelry store occurred many years. Stick with me, there's a little surprise ending here. He was given an extraordinary amount, he has given an extraordinary amount of time to returning veterans' causes in the form of money and personal service. As an example, after hearing of a returning Iraq veteran who was severely wounded and languishing in a VA hospital, Mr. Fixler took up his case and was able to get him transferred to a private hospital. Through a prolonged fundraising effort, he was able to donate $100,000 to his family for the ongoing care that our government would not provide. As a result of this effort, he committed to the veteran cause, to those who return and those who do not return, and 100% of the profits from the book, SemperCool, goes to wounded combat veterans and their families, as well as to the children of those killed in Iraq and Vietnam. Barry grew up in a mostly Jewish neighborhood in Syosset, New York. If he was slow in math, he had a math tutor. Slow in English, he had an English tutor. Anything he wanted, he got. Drums, guitar, singing lessons, his own room, his own TV, his own air conditioner. He had 2 cars, a motorcycle, and a horse by the time he was 16. His mother could scream and holler at him. He wasn't intimidated by her, and he would just laugh it off. His father, on the other hand, was different. But since he worked all the time, he was not a disciplinarian. With him, it was, sounds familiar? No TV for 2 days, and then a half an hour later, he would say, okay, you can watch TV. His father served in the Army during World War II, and he was in awe of the Marines. This planted the seed into Barry to become a Marine, and the seed grew into a passion. Louis Fixler, the father, grew up in the 1920s and 1930s as a Jew in Romania and Hungary, very poor, running from town to town. He had 4 brothers and 4 sisters. Those were the days of large families. That was before Hitler, but even in those parts of Europe, Jews were not welcome, so his father's family fled across the Atlantic. When Louis was 14 years old, they settled in the Bronx. Louis was in his 20s in 1940, and he joined the Army. Putting on the uniform for the first time, he said later, it felt like he belonged to a country. He was stationed in Hawaii on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. He was proud to be a Pearl Harbor survivor, and from 1941 to 45, he hopped from island to island in the Pacific Theater. Okay, Barry joined the Marines during his senior year in high school, after being inspired by his father's stories about his experience with Marines during his Army days in World War II. He was a slight 130 pounds, but athletic, and during his senior year, he'd run every day after school to get ready. On the night before his reporting date, that's when he told his parents that he was joining the Marines. He did not want to be talked out of it. It was 4 months after graduation, and he reported to Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn at 9 a.m., and it was off to Paris Island in South Carolina. The bus arrived at 2:30 a.m., and the drill instructor said, you have 10 effing seconds to get off the bus, and 9 are gone. I heard that same thing. I did. I heard that same thing when I arrived at Fort Dix in 1963. Their objective is to tear you down to nothing, strip you of your civilian identity, and build a Marine. Now, it was tedious basic training where every day the drill instructor had the recruits lined up outside where they could hear pop, 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 pop of gunfire. The drill instructor said, well, those are recruits that can't make it. And you might think we're sending them home to mommy and daddy. No, we are not sending you home. We are killing you, actually killing you dead. Now, instead of pop, pop, it was boom, boom, boom. And the only thought Barry had was bad. The next day was Sunday, and the drill instructor stormed into the barracks, screaming at the 90 guys to attention. He said, I know that I ain't got no Jews in my platoon. I do not have a Jew, and I know it. That I don't, and if I do have a Jew, and I know that I don't have any, take a step forward. Well, Barry was the only one to step forward. And he said to himself, didn't even last 3 days. The drill instructor asked all Jews to face left and march. He was the only one, and he marched in front of his platoon, and through a door he saw 3 men in dark suits. Guys in their 40s and 50s. He thought, what? Undertakers. Right? Okay. Okay. What went through his mind was that he wasn't even a good Jew. He kept on failing in Hebrew school, which he attended from age 6 to 13. He couldn't pick up Hebrew. His mother panicked, but his father decided he would get him a tutor. What he described as a jerky old, big-bellied, bearded rabbi would come to tutor him. He was probably in his 50s, but he looked like he was 90. He came and played him a record of his Haftorah for Barry to learn, but the rabbi would fall asleep 2 minutes into the session. After a while, his parents caught the rabbi sleeping and fired him, resulting in Barry doing his Haftorah, not in Hebrew, but in English. So marching from the boot camp barracks toward the men in dark suits, to him that was being Jewish was going to be a pretty stupid reason for him to die. The guys in suits could tell he was uneasy. They said, calm down. We are civilians from the B'nai B'rith. We know that you're Jewish, and we are here to take you to Jewish services. Every Sunday we come and look for new Jews, and that the Marine Corps makes allowances for religious services for everybody, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, every Sunday. He was there with 4 other recruits. The B'nai B'rith took a picture at the chapel and sent it to his parents. They showed it to him when he returned from Vietnam. It said, best wishes, B'nai B'rith, Savannah, Georgia. They had come from Savannah to Paris Island just for the recruits. Okay, boot camp graduation was in front of families. The next step was to go to combat training for 6 weeks. On entering the bus, the basic training drill instructor said, board the bus, Marines, good luck. And at that point, he realized that he was a Marine. On to Vietnam. Phu Bai was the name of the camp for the 2nd Battalion, 26th Division Marines. Fixler replaced the guy who was sent home because, just like Dr. Brief had treated, he had both legs blown off by a bouncing Betty. He lived in a hooch, and his first day in the jungle on a mission, no Marines were killed. Going on daily missions, Fixler felt he had become a seasoned veteran after only 3 or 4 months. Then, like Dr. Brief, the orthopedic surgeon, it was time for the Jewish holidays. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and a trip to Da Nang, where services were held for Jewish Armed Forces personnel. This was not the jungle, it was civilized, but after the service, it was back to business. This time, the orders were to climb a mountain. A plane had crashed, and the job was to see if there were any survivors. A search and rescue mission. R&R, relax and whatever, R&R in Hong Kong.
Rest and relax.
There you go, rest and relaxation. Besides finding girls, they had money to spend, and they went to a tailor for a fine Hong Kong suit. The suit was paid for and sent to his parents' home in Syosset. When it arrived, it smelled like formaldehyde. So his mother took it to the cleaners. The cleaner said, Mrs. Fixley, you're not going to believe this, but your son's suit is made out of cardboard. All right, now case on. On January 20th, 2009, President Barack Obama said the following at his inaugural address. In reaffirming the greatness of our nation, we understand that greatness is never a given. It must be earned. Our journey has never been one of shortcuts or settling for less. It has not been the path for fair-hearted, for those who prefer leisure over work, or seek only the pleasure of riches and fame. Rather, it had been the risk-takers, the doers, the makers of things, some celebrated more often men and women, celebrated but more often men and women obscure in their labor, who have carried us up the long, rugged path towards prosperity and freedom. For us, they fought and died in places like Concord, Gettysburg, Normandy, and Khe Sanh. Fixler says we either became men or we became statistics at the siege of Khe Sanh. Those who became statistics were the real men. They were the heroes. Khe Sanh may not have altered the outcome of the war, but it added to the mystique. The siege of Khe Sanh occurred in the Quang Tri province of South Vietnam, just below the 17th parallel and the demilitarized zone. It was a 77-day siege that the North Vietnamese launched on January 21st, 1968, and it was the longest and deadliest battle of the Vietnam War. In his book, Battalion of Kings, Captain William Studdy said that 456 Marines died at Khe Sanh from January 20th, 1968 to April 16th of 1968, along with 83 Army troops, 23 Navy, and 7 Air Force. Some estimates put the North Vietnam deaths at 20,000. It was now 6 months into Vietnam, and now Fixler was promoted to Lance Corporal. Then it was Squad Leader Fixler. The siege of Khe Sanh was living hell, only if you were lucky enough to stay alive in trenches, with constant artillery, mortar, and rocket fire. But Fixler said that we were Marines and our morale was up. More than 58,000 Americans were killed in Vietnam. Agent Orange was a herbicide, a defoliant, that was sprayed from the air over huge areas of jungle to kill vegetation and deny cover for the enemy. It turned out to be deadly to friend and foe, probably including my brother-in-law, a career Army warrant officer who did 3 tours of Vietnam and died in 1982 at age 44 of lung cancer, maybe from Agent Orange. Sad. It was April 17, 1968, and after 77 straight days of fighting, the battlefield fell quiet at sunrise. It seemed the enemy had packed up and left. Now it was formally Corporal Fixler, when his unit was evacuated. After 13 months of death and destruction, it becomes very easy to kill. Fixler says that he never lost sense of right and wrong. He says he never lost control, and it did not get to a point where human life meant nothing. So he was coming home. August 22nd, 1968, it was back to Okinawa and then the States. There were some parades, but it was rare to get a pat on the back. Fixler was disappointed and surprised. He felt it was too far-fetched to try to explain Vietnam to someone who had not experienced it. He doesn't believe in post-traumatic stress disorder because he made it through. Counted himself lucky, came home, and went on with his life. You live your life, and other than the citation from President Lyndon Johnson, is your personal feeling for doing good for your country. Stresses from the war. Tuesday, May 7, 1985, there was a parade for Vietnam veterans in New York City. Fixler believed that this was the time they were acknowledged, not only for him, but for all Vietnam veterans. He was excited about this, and it was a big deal to him. He got into the staging area early. He looked for his unit. Example, Airborne looked for Airborne, Cavalry looked for Cavalry, and Fixler, he found the Khe Sanh group. That was his group. He also found someone from his company. It was Smiley. Big guy, 6'2", 270 pounds with no teeth. He was in the category of vetted out, stressed out as a result of the war. They marched together over the Brooklyn Bridge, down Wall Street. Office workers threw confetti from the buildings. Fixler says that was great. The next parade was the next year in Chicago on Friday, June 13th, 1986, organized by his squad leader, Tom Eichler, now a Chicago policeman. Quezon veterans were invited to Eichler's house the day before the parade. Fixler invited Smiley to go to the event because Fixler had the money and Smiley did not. They met at Fixler's office in the Empire State Building, where the attire was business attire. Smiley arrived looking like a madman. He wore combat fatigues, combat boots, floppy hat, and no teeth. They went to Newark Airport for a People Express flight to Chicago. Like Southwest today, you got to the gate, got online, picked your own seat. No seat assignments. They arrived late, so they sat in the next to last row. In those days, in the back of the plane, you could smoke. Smiley took out a pipe with pot and lit it up. In Smiley's mind, he was a Vietnam veteran and sort of above the law. Fixler moved to the front of the plane to get a magazine and did not return until Smiley was finished getting stoned. By that time, the plane reeked of marijuana, and the people around them were pretty high too. The flight attendants were just too scared to do anything. The plane lands in Chicago, expecting the police to take away Smiley. The only policeman to meet the plane was Eichler. He and a few other Vietnam veterans were there to greet him and give them a ride. Okay. Now we get to Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2005. This happened in Fixler's jewelry store in Bardonia, New York, on Route 304. Bardonia is part of the town of Clarkstown, which includes New City, Congress, Valley Cottage, West Nyack, parts of Nanuet, parts of Spring Valley, and Bardonia. The big guy in the trench coat came across the counter of his jewelry store and shoved an automatic pistol into his face and screamed, "I will kill you." The guy and his accomplice came into the store asking about an engagement ring. Well, Fixler's brain snapped into high gear, and like in combat, he evaluated the situation. There was an automatic pistol in his face, and he said, now I have to kill. He found out later, and he had his gun there, and he got his gun, and he shot the two perpetrators. He found out later that 2 vehicles and 4 people were involved. One never made it out of the store. The man who put the automatic pistol into his face made it out of the store because he had a bulletproof vest. The cops caught the guy not long after on Route 59. A retired detective heard about the holdup on police radio and chased the thug into the Toys R Us parking lot off Route 59. The thug ripped off rubber gloves, trying to flee, and when asked why, he said he was supposed to get rid of the jeweler and he did not want to get blood all over him. They also had a body bag ready. The guy who left in the minivan went into Wendy's off Route 59 to hide, and Clarkstown police were waiting for him there. The other 2 fled to Danbury, Connecticut, and the cops were able to track him down from leads given by the other perpetrator who was arrested. It was 5 minutes later that Detective Bill Fritz from the Clarkstown Police Department showed up with a notepad like you see on TV. He said to Fixler, "Give me every detail." He was questioned in the police car because the jewelry store was now a crime scene. The videotape device in the store captured everything. When the cops played it later, they came back saying, "Wow." It seems a friend of Fixler had come into the store the day before with his girlfriend, and she had new breast implants, and they both wanted to show off, which she did. So the camera not only captured the robbery, it showed this woman bearing her breast and shaking them into the camera. The police had to take out the breast episode. They also advised him not to talk to the media. Okay. Then there was a lecture at the New City Library. In March of 2008, the lady that runs the Veterans Program put together a lecture and a book signing by Dr. Edward Tick, who wrote the book, Healing Our Nation's Veterans from Post post-traumatic stress disorder. About 100 people showed up. Men and women, veterans from the Iraq War, all the way back to World War II. It was about 50-50 men and women. Not all were veterans. There were sons, daughters, parents, people who had some connection to veterans, and a lot of people were civilians with no military connection. Fixler went because he knew how he felt about post-traumatic stress disorder. He wanted to see what the other side had to say. He also said to himself, keep it low-key and just sit there and listen. The speaker was about 10 to 15 minutes into the lecture when he started to describe one of his patients who had fought at Khe Sanh. He described how traumatized the Marine was, how his hill was overrun, how he had to kill or be killed, how he had lost his soul then and there. It was obvious that Dr. Tick was describing the night of February 5th, 1968, the night the Marines were overrun on Hill 861-A. Tick was quoting his patient, speaking for the Marine on how he lost his soul, about everything being gone, and he was spiritually dead. Fixler could not take it any longer. He was recognized by the speaker in the question period. He said, I was at Khe Sanh, I have credibility, a unit citation from President Lyndon Johnson, and I was on the Hill at the exact time, at the exact moment. If the Marine said to you about losing his soul, losing his life, losing everything, I would say to him, this is what he said, you're a coward. Dr. Tick was taken aback by his comment, but when he did mumble, I see your point. Also in the audience were 3 cadets from West Point, which is only about 23 miles from New City, who were on assignment researching post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of the other veterans spoke, and their experience was different than his. They came back from Vietnam and were spit on by anti-war, protested, treated horribly, sacrificed everything, and have not received nearly enough in return. He says, if you agree, that would truly be SemperCool. Thank you. Okay, anybody have any comments? Any questions? Yes?
Yeah. 1965, Lyndon Johnson recognized the Vietnam War was a mistake. And he would like to pull our troops out. But he said, I don't want to be the first president to lose a war. And that was the tragedy of Vietnam. They knew it was a mistake, and they kept it going.
I agree.
And thousands of lives got killed.
Right. Well, it's going on today, isn't it?
And Iraq was the same thing. We never learned.
If you lose one life, to me, it's one life too many.
No, we never learned.
Anyone else? Sorry?
Very well done. Very well done.
I just want to make a comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the Gettysburg 1863. Okay, come.
Wait a minute.